Dawn light spilled across the terminal windows of North Cascade International, tinting everything in pale gold as passengers boarded SkyVista Flight 774 bound for Montreal. The early morning buzz was routine, luggage wheels rattling, intercom chatter, cabin crews smiling through the rush. Among the crowd moved Arlen Brooke, a quiet man in simple clothes carrying nothing but a worn duffel bag. He looked like someone who blended into airports naturally. Calm, unhurried, almost impossible to notice unless you were trying. He took his seat near the middle of the aircraft, rested his hands on his knees and stared out at the sunrise reflecting off the wing. To anyone else, he was just another traveler heading north. But the captain, the first officer, the attendants, even the other passengers had no idea that this ordinary-looking man had once been someone entirely different. Not that Arlen wanted anyone to know. He preferred silence. He preferred anonymity. He preferred this moment, watching the day wake up beneath him, to the storms he had walked through years before. The engines hummed, the cabin door sealed, the aircraft pushed back, and as the wheels began rolling toward the runway, the cabin speakers chimed with a crisp announcement about safety procedures, followed by another voice, softer and more conversational, drifting into the narrative from the in-flight screen. Before I tell you what happened next, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It helps more than you know. The passengers barely noticed the broadcast weaving into the morning routine, but 30 seconds later, everything changed. While the aircraft taxied, Arlen's eyes drifted toward something unusual outside, two service vehicles speeding across the tarmac, too fast for safety protocols, and disappearing behind a maintenance hangar. A momentary ripple of instinct tightened his chest. He forced himself to look away. "Not your world anymore," he whispered. The plane reached the runway threshold. Engines spooled higher. The nose lifted. The world sank beneath them in a rush of light and cloud. The flight stabilized around 15,000 feet, leveling with ease. The attendants unbuckled and began moving through the aisle, offering water, checking belts, exchanging morning smiles. Then the captain's voice returned, oddly tense. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been informed of unexpected military activity in our corridor. Nothing to be concerned about, but we've been instructed to maintain current altitude." Passengers exchanged curious glances. Arlen didn't. His gaze locked on the faint glint outside the window. Two distant silhouettes rising fast from the western horizon. Not commercial, not cargo. Not in formation typical of a routine patrol. He exhaled slowly. "Not today," he murmured. Down the aisle, a young attendant named Rhea noticed Arlen's fixed stare. "Sir, everything all right?" she asked quietly. He forced a faint smile. "Just turbulence ahead." She nodded politely, unaware of what turbulence really meant in his vocabulary, and returned to her duties. Minutes ticked by. The silhouettes grew clearer, sharp-edged, confident, cutting through cloud seams like sharpened steel. The aircraft's onboard radar wasn't designed to detect them this early, but Arlen didn't need instruments. He recognized their posture in the sky. Aggressive, precise, purposeful. Then the captain's voice returned, this time strained. Folks, we've been advised to hold our heading. Military aircraft will be escorting us for a short duration." Passengers gasped. An escort? For a commercial liner? Phones lifted. People murmured. Arlen's jaw tightened. They weren't escorting the jet. They were coming for something, or someone, on it. Someone who had spent years trying to disappear. He closed his eyes and pressed his head back against the seat. Of all days, why this one? At 30,000 feet, the two military jets closed into visible range. Their sleek bodies glimmered beneath the rising sun, one banking to port, the other to starboard. The cabin vibrated faintly as they took parallel positions. People rushed toward windows. The excitement was surreal, like watching a movie scene unfold inches from the glass. Cameras clicked. Voices rose. Rhea stepped quickly through the aisle, urging everyone to remain seated. Arlen didn't move. He knew exactly what would happen next, not because the escort was alarming, but because of the insignia painted beneath the wing. A silver falcon with a fractured tail. A symbol he had hoped never to see again. The lead fighter rolled slightly, revealing its call sign through the open comm frequency. a sound that made Arlen's chest tighten. SkyVista 774, this is Sentinel Flight. We have a message for one passenger on board. Murmurs erupted. The captain replied, confused, "Identify the recipient." A pause. Then the fighter pilot responded, voice steady, crystal clear. "We're looking for Eagle 1. Every head in the cabin turned. Arlen didn't flinch. He only whispered one sentence under his breath. "Of course you are." Because within the next 5 minutes the fighter pilots would reveal that the threat wasn't outside the aircraft at all. It was something tied directly to Arlen's past, and it had just awakened. Confusion spread through the cabin like a slow-moving wave. Passengers whispered, shifting in their seats, wondering who Eagle 1 could possibly be. The name felt too dramatic, too cinematic to belong to anyone sitting among them. But Arlen Brooke didn't share their curiosity. He had been bracing for this moment from the second he saw the formation rise through the clouds. The captain spoke again, his voice noticeably tighter. "Sentinel Flight, say again. Which passenger are you requesting?" The radio crackled, then steadied. "Eagle 1, confirmed male. He will understand." Rhea, the attendant from earlier, stood frozen in the aisle, glancing from face to face. Does anyone know what this means?" she asked, half whispering to herself. Arlen raised his hand slowly. The entire row fell silent. The people behind him leaned forward. A man across the aisle pulled off his headphones. "You?" Rhea breathed out. Arlen nodded. "It's me." Rhea stared at him, searching his face for anything recognizable, anything that explained the sudden military attention. But the man in front of her looked no different than before, calm, steady, almost resigned. She exhaled shakily. "Should I tell the captain?" "No need," Arlen replied quietly. "They already know." Outside, one of the fighters tilted its wing in a controlled salute, unmistakably signaling recognition. The cabin erupted. "Who are you? What's happening? Is this a threat? Are we safe?" Questions fired from every direction. Arlen stood, his movements controlled and grounded. "I'm not a danger to anyone here," he said firmly. "Just someone the military lost track of." That answer only made people more anxious. Rhea swallowed hard. "Sir, the cockpit wants to speak to you." He nodded and stepped into the aisle. As Arlen reached the front galley, the cockpit door cracked open. The captain, a middle-aged man with sharp, worried eyes, motioned him inside. "Mr. Brooke, is it?" the captain asked, sounding unsure if that was even the man's real name. "That's the one I use," Arlen replied. The first officer leaned forward. "Why are jet fighters calling you Eagle 1? That's not normal procedure." Arlen took a seat behind them. "Because once, a long time ago, that was my call sign. I was part of a reconnaissance program the military decided to pretend never existed." The captain blinked. "Reconnaissance? You mean different than that?" Arlen said, cutting him off gently. "What we did wasn't about surveillance. It was about predictive risk mapping, reading the sky like a moving equation." The first officer frowned. "Predictive? As in forecasting?" "Threat patterns," Arlen clarified. "Unusual flight signatures. Anomalous behavior." The captain inhaled sharply. "And you think that's why they're here now?" "I know it is," Arlen said. "They picked up something, and whatever they found, it's tied to me." The cockpit fell silent. Then the comm system chirped. "SkyVista 774, this is Sentinel Lead. Prepare to relay critical information." The captain pressed transmit. "Sentinel Lead, go ahead. Be advised. We detected a coded beacon aboard your aircraft. It's pulsing under a legacy signature, one we traced to a classified program retired nearly 9 years ago." Arlen closed his eyes. He knew exactly which program, and exactly why this wasn't a routine escort. The captain looked back at him. "A beacon? On this plane?" The first officer shook his head. "There's nothing like that in commercial equipment. It's not in the aircraft," Arlen said slowly. "It's on a person." The cockpit stared at him. Arlen nodded. "It's on me." Back in the cabin, passengers pressed against windows as the fighters tightened formation, clearly preparing for the next phase of whatever operation they had initiated. Rhea kept trying to calm people, but even she watched the jets with thinly veiled fear. The aircraft shuddered slightly as it passed through a thin stretch of turbulence. Arlen's voice came over the cabin speakers, calm, level, steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. Everything is under control." He had asked the captain to let him speak. The captain agreed, and reluctantly. But at that point, there was no hiding anything. Rhea peered inside the cockpit as Arlen continued. Years ago, I was involved in a project the military buried. They believed everything from that program was dismantled, but something they missed is now active again, and it's pinging from right here. The cabin was dead silent. We'll land safely, Arlen added, but I need to understand what triggered it. One of the passengers finally asked. Triggered what? Arlen took a breath. The last remaining failsafe of a program called Halo Vector. The captain stiffened. Halo Vector, that sounds... Not a weapon, Arlen interrupted. A warning. Outside, one of the fighters rolled sharply, repositioning in a move that wasn't escort protocol. Arlen knew that maneuver. They were preparing for the next step. A step meant only for him. He stood, braced against the overhead. Whatever Halo Vector woke up, he murmured, it's not done. Because in less than 3 minutes, the fighters would force the captain into a maneuver no commercial pilot had ever been ordered to perform. And Arlen would be the only one who knew why. The captain's knuckles whitened around the control yoke as the lead fighter drifted ahead of the airliner, cutting through the sunlight like a blade. The formation shifted, tightening with unmistakable intention. This was no ceremonial escort. This was positioning. The cockpit radio snapped alive again. SkyVista 774, Sentinel lead. Prepare for controlled altitude recalibration. The captain leaned toward the mic. Sentinel lead, we are a civilian flight with civilian passengers. What exactly are we recalibrating for? A pause. Then, for the safety of all aboard. Those words chilled the cockpit. The first officer whispered, they're about to force us down. Arlen remained at the rear jump seat, expression unreadable. The captain turned to him. If there's something you're still not telling me, now would be an excellent time. Arlen's gaze settled on the horizon. They're not forcing you down. They're isolating a signal, and they need the aircraft in a very specific corridor to triangulate it. A corridor? The first officer repeated. In open sky? Yes, Arlen said softly. Halo Vector did not use standard satellite networks. The captain exhaled shakily. Wonderful. The aircraft dipped as the fighters signaled the first heading adjustment. Before I tell you what happened next, the captain muttered under his breath, almost in disbelief. Subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what time it is where you're watching from. It helps more than you know. Arlen looked up. What was that? Stress, the captain said flatly. Ignore it. But tension remained thick enough to touch. Meanwhile, in the cabin, passengers clung to their armrests as the jet made an unnaturally smooth but noticeable bank. Rhea steadied herself against the galley wall. They're making us turn again, a woman said, gripping her husband's arm. Why are those jets so close? Another whispered. Rhea tried to reassure them, her voice steady but softer now. We are in contact with the Air Force and everything is being handled. Then under her breath, I hope. She peered back toward the cockpit, but the door remained sealed. Behind her, a teenager craned his neck to the window. Mom, the fighters aren't leaving, they're moving in tighter. They were, and Arlen knew exactly why. Inside the cockpit, the radio flared again. SkyVista 7-7-4, begin descent to flight level 200. The captain stiffened. Negative. We have no emergency and no authorization for forced descent. Sentinel lead replied with crisp precision. Authorization has been issued through Executive Directive Epsilon. Verification code follows. When the code came through, the captain's face drained of color. That's real, he whispered. That directive bypasses everyone. Even Airspace Command. Arlen lifted his head. They believe the beacon is tied to an imminent threat. The first officer turned to him. What kind of threat? The kind Halo Vector was designed to detect, Arlen said. Unregistered systems, rogue tech, signals that indicate hostile intent. The captain shook his head. But why would it activate now? And why on you? Arlen didn't answer. He couldn't. Not yet. The descent began gently. Too gently to panic the passengers, but the altitude readout dropped all the same. Outside, the fighters' wings glinted as they shifted formation into an inverted triangle. Sentinel lead leveled just ahead of the cockpit, so close Arlen could see the faint stripes on the pilot's helmet. The radio crackled once more. SkyVista, stand by for visual acquisition. The captain snapped. What does that mean? Arlen answered before the fighters could. They want eyes on me. The cockpit fell silent. Ria's voice suddenly echoed through the door intercom. Captain, people are getting scared. Should I? Stand by, the captain said, voice tight. He unlatched the cockpit door and cracked it open just enough for Ria to slip inside. She froze when she saw Arlen sitting behind them. You're still here, she whispered. He's why they're here, the first officer muttered. Ria stared at the fighters outside, then back at Arlen. Are they going to land us somewhere else? Maybe, Arlen said quietly. But that's not their priority. What is? Arlen exhaled. To confirm something about me, and something about the beacon. The captain turned back to him. What kind of beacon can do this? Arlen's answer was barely above a whisper. One that shouldn't exist anymore. The fighters pulled ahead in perfect synchronization. Then one tilted its wing, signaling a maneuver civilian pilots were never meant to see. Sentinel lead spoke again. Prepare for visual transfer. The captain jerked his head around. Visual transfer of what? We're at cruising speed. Arlen stood slowly. He had known this moment was coming from the instant he saw the formation. Me, he said. Ria gasped. They're taking you? As if confirming, the lead fighter rolled, sharply and matched speed with eerie precision, positioning itself as close as a jet could safely get. Arlen stepped forward, steadying himself. If they're doing what I think, then yes. Ria grabbed his arm. Why? Who are you? Arlen paused, a weight settling on him. A truth carried far too long. I used to be the one they called when something unknown appeared on radar. When something didn't fit normal threat logic. He looked out the cockpit window at the fighter waiting for him. Back then, they didn't call me Arlen. The captain whispered, Then what did they call you? Arlen turned his eyes toward the horizon. Echo 7. Ria's hand slipped from his arm. The fighters tightened formation again. Arlen knew what came next, and he knew there was no turning back. Because in less than 2 minutes, the Air Force would attempt a mid-air extraction no civilian aircraft had ever witnessed, and Arlen Brooke would have to decide whether to go with them, or reveal the truth he'd spent 9 years running from. The airliner hummed steadily, but the air inside felt like it had thinned. Every person in the cockpit, the captain, the first officer, Ria, and Arlen, watched the fighter jet outside slide into a frighteningly precise alignment with their right wing. Sentinel lead's voice came through once more, crisp and unwavering. Prepare for vector extraction. The captain threw his hands up. That's not a term I've ever heard. What does that even mean? Arlen didn't blink. It means they're going to remove me from this aircraft. Mid-air. Ria grabbed the back of the captain's seat for stability. Remove you? At this speed, that's impossible. Not if the equipment is configured for it, Arlen said, steady as stone. Halo Vector was built around rapid retrieval. The program only existed for a few years, but it was designed for situations where time was the difference between saving a city or losing one. The cockpit fell silent. Even the radio hesitated before chiming again. SkyVista 774, confirm passenger identity. We have confirmation of Echo 7 signature activation. The captain pressed transmit, swallowing hard. Sentinel lead. The individual they call Echo 7 is present. A long exhale crackled through the speaker. Copy that. Maintain current speed. Extraction team is locking trajectory. Outside, the second fighter dropped slightly below the cockpit level, tilting just enough for the pilot to glance upward. A simple motion, but unmistakably human. A signal of recognition. Arlen closed his eyes. The last time he saw that gesture, he had been flying an entirely different kind of aircraft. A prototype glider built for silent approach, not commercial travel. A time when he answered to a call sign, not a boarding ticket. Ria stepped closer. Arlen, why did you leave? If they needed you this badly, why disappear? His eyes opened, steady and tired. Because Halo Vector wasn't supposed to exist. Because after our final mission, the people in charge decided the threat wasn't from the skies, it was from us. The captain and first officer exchanged alarmed glances. Arlen continued, voice low. When a system can detect hostile anomalies before anyone else even realizes they exist, some commanders see that as an advantage. Others see it as a risk they can't control. Ria's expression softened with dawning understanding. They shut you down. They erased us, Arlen corrected. Our names, Our records, our service, every flight we took, every mission we completed. All buried. He tapped his chest lightly. Except for the fail-safe beacon. They insisted it was dead, but as long as one of us stayed alive, there was always a chance it would wake up. The radio flared suddenly, cutting through the tension. Vector extraction will commence in 90 seconds. SkyVista, maintain altitude exactly as instructed. The first officer muttered. 90 seconds. This is insane. The passenger cabin behind them stirred with rising panic. Even through the sealed cockpit, muffled cries and frantic questions seeped through. Rhea looked at Arlen. Tell me the truth. Is this extraction safe? His answer was calm but devastating. It's safer than the alternative. Before they could ask what that meant, the aircraft jolted. Not violently, but deliberately. The lead fighter had moved ahead and was signaling the exact descent arc the captain had to follow. The captain adjusted controls reluctantly. They're flying us like a puppet show. Better than turbulence, Arlen said quietly. The cabin phone buzzed from behind the captain. It was one of the attendants. Sir, passengers are panicking. They're seeing the jets. Some think we're being hijacked. Rhea reached over and grabbed the phone. Just buckle everyone down and tell them no one is in danger, she said. We'll be fine. But even she didn't sound convinced. Arlen placed a hand on the bulkhead, steadying himself as the jet slightly dipped again. Then his gaze sharpened. Captain, they're not just extracting me. The captain frowned. What are you talking about? Arlen pointed at the rear display, at a faint pulsing icon blinking beneath the fuselage. That's not the aircraft transponder, that's the beacon lock. Someone activated it manually. Rhea's jaw dropped. You mean someone else on board triggered it? Arlen's voice dropped. No. Someone else attached it. The cockpit froze. The first officer whispered, Attached? When? How? Arlen stared out the window, watching the fighter ease into position. Before boarding, someone wanted Halo Vector to wake up. Someone wanted them to find me. A new chill swept through the cockpit. Rhea whispered, Then this wasn't an accident. No, Arlen said, this was bait. The radio blared one more time. Echo 7. Stand by for transfer approach. Outside, the canopy of the nearest fighter slid back. Arlen exhaled. It's time. Because when Arlen stepped toward that open fighter canopy, he had no idea that the person who planted the beacon was sitting less than 10 rows behind him and had no intention of letting him leave alive. The canopy of the fighter jet slid fully open, shimmering under the morning light as it matched the airliner's trajectory with uncanny precision. The two aircraft moved as if tethered by invisible rails, the fighter pilot keeping perfect rhythm with every micro-adjustment the commercial jet made. Inside the cabin, chaos simmered beneath a fragile hush. Passengers clung to their armrests, eyes glued to the windows, some filming, others praying. Every face carried the same unspoken fear. Why was one man being collected like cargo at 30,000 feet? Arlen Brooke stepped out of the cockpit and into the forward galley where Rhea waited, pale but steady. She studied him for a long moment, as if trying to memorize his face. Are you sure you want to do this? She whispered. Arlen nodded. It's the only way to keep everyone safe. What happens when you leave? If I'm right, he said, pulling the galley curtain aside, this aircraft will be cleared. The beacon will go dark once I'm out of range. Rhea frowned. And if you're wrong? Arlen paused. He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped into the aisle. The passengers watched him pass. Some with fear, some with awe, some with questions he didn't have the time or luxury to answer. The jet hummed under his feet as the fighter outside prepared for its approach. Seat by seat, he moved toward the emergency exit marked for extraction. And that's when he felt it. A gaze. Focused, deliberate, cold. Arlen's steps slowed. Row 16, window side. A man in a dark jacket holding a tablet case tight against his knees stared straight at him. Not with confusion like the others, but with something sharper. Anticipation. Satisfaction. Arlen recognized that look. It wasn't fear. It was ownership. The man blinked once like a silent acknowledgement. Arlen's pulse tightened. Rhea leaned in behind him. Arlen, what's wrong? He didn't answer. He couldn't, not here. Not with 30 rows of terrified bystanders listening to his every word. But he knew one thing instantly. The beacon was not planted on the aircraft. It was planted by him. The man in row 16, a stranger with the calmness of someone who believed he had already won. Arlen forced himself to keep walking. They'd handle him later, if there was a later. At the forward exit, the captain opened the hatch panel, revealing the manual override used only for maintenance. Wind roared through the narrow gap as pressure equalized around the doorframe. The fighter, outside, edged even closer, canopy open, pilot signaling readiness. Arlen gripped the overhead bar. The captain leaned in close, shouting over the wind. "Once you're out, what do we do?" "Follow Sentinel lead," Arlen yelled. "They'll guide you clear once the beacon loses its lock. And if it doesn't?" Arlen locked eyes with him. "Then you'll see maneuver orders no commercial aircraft has ever received." The captain swore under his breath. Rhea stood beside them, trying to stay steady against the storm of wind and noise. "Arlen, please come back. At least tell me you'll come back." His voice was soft, almost swallowed by the roar outside. "I'll try." She searched his expression. It wasn't a promise he could keep, and she knew it. Before he could step through the threshold, the radio in the cockpit blasted across the entire cabin speaker system. "Echo 7. Extraction is green. Repeat. Extraction is green. Prepare for vector latch." The fighter slid in even closer, no more than an arm's length from the open doorway. Passengers screamed at the impossible sight. Arlen steadied himself. Then, a sound cut through the white noise, sharp as a blade. A metallic click behind him. Arlen froze, turned. Row 16. The man in the dark jacket was standing now. Not panicked, not trembling. Standing with purpose, pushing through passengers who recoiled instinctively. In his hand was the tablet case, only it wasn't a tablet case. It was a containment unit, a compact military-grade device. Arlen's eyes widened. Not a beacon, a trigger. Rhea screamed, "Arlen, behind you!" Arlen lunged just as the man opened the case, revealing a pulsing module shaped like a narrow prism humming with a faint, sinister glow. The true activation point of Halo Vector. The reason the fighters were here. Not to retrieve Arlen. To contain whatever this was. The man smiled, a cold, eerily satisfied smile, and whispered just loud enough for Arlen to hear. "You should have stayed erased." He pressed his thumb to the module. Arlen slammed into him. The aircraft jolted violently. Lights flickered overhead, and for the first time since the beacon awakened, Arlen had no idea if anyone on board was getting out alive, because in the next 60 seconds the truth about Halo Vector would explode into the open, and Arlen Brooke would come face to face with the very reason he vanished from the world 9 years ago. The aircraft pitched hard to the right, throwing passengers against their seatbelts as alarms screamed from every direction. Luggage burst from overhead bins. Oxygen masks rattled. A baby wailed somewhere mid-cabin. The fighter jets outside scattered, banking sharply to avoid collision. Arlen Brooke hit the floor with the man from row 16, both of them slamming against the bulkhead near the open extraction hatch. Wind thundered in through the partially unlocked door, pulling at their clothes, threatening to rip anything unsecured straight into the sky. The module, the pulsing prism, skittered across the aisle and came to rest against a row of seats. Its glow intensified, each beat brighter than the last, like a countdown accelerating towards something catastrophic. The man clamped a hand around Arlen's collar and pulled him in close, shouting over the roaring wind. "You were never supposed to survive that last mission. Halo Vector died with you." Arlen gritted his teeth. "You should have stayed out of the program." The man drove a knee into Arlen's ribs. Pain shot up Arlen's side. Passengers screamed and scrambled out of reach, clutching their seats, terrified to move but too afraid to stay still. Rhea, bracing herself against a galley cabinet, yelled over the chaos. "Arlen, the device, it's heating up." It was more than heating. The air around the module shimmered. It had begun charging. Arlen lunged for it, but the saboteur grabbed his arm and yanked him backward with surprising strength. "You don't get to shut this down," the man hissed. "Not again. Not after 9 years of hiding while the rest of us paid the price for your escape." Arlen twisted his body, slammed his elbow into the man's jaw, and ripped free. The fighter jets reappeared outside the window, one of them broadcasting over emergency frequency. "SkyVista 7-7-4, your onboard anomaly is spiking. If the charge reaches critical, we are authorized to forcibly remove the module." The captain's voice cracked from the cockpit speakers. Forcibly remove? How? By removing the section it is attached to. Passengers screamed. Arlen locked eyes with Rhea. Her face was pale, terrified, but trusting. He grabbed the overhead handle, pulling himself toward the device as turbulence rattled the entire aircraft. The cabin lights flickered, then steadied again. The module vibrated. Fast. Dangerously fast. Arlen wrapped both hands around the prism. It seared his palms instantly, heat biting. Through skin, the man in the dark jacket staggered to his feet and shouted, "You remove it, it destabilizes. You leave it, it detonates. Either way, this aircraft isn't landing." Arlen growled through clenched teeth. "You don't know the system anymore." He pulled. The device resisted like it was glued to the air around it, anchored by something unseen. A pulse shot through him. A flash of the same training sessions he had spent years trying to forget. He gripped harder. Another pulse. Rhea shouted, "Arlen, hurry!" The module's glow surged. Then, it released. Arlen stumbled backward, holding the prism in both burning hands. The saboteur roared and charged. Arlen stepped aside. The man tripped toward the open extraction hatch, grabbing the edge at the last second. Wind tore at him. His grip slipped an inch, then another. He glared up at Arlen. "You ruined everything." Arlen didn't respond. He simply hit the switch that sealed the hatch. The door slammed shut, locking with a deep metallic thud. The man collapsed to the floor, defeated. Rhea rushed forward, grabbing Arlen's arm. "Your hands!" "They'll be fine," he said, breath shaking. "Help me get this to the cockpit." They pushed through the aisle together, passengers parting like water. Fear softened into relief as Arlen passed. Even the captain stared when he entered the cockpit, holding the sputtering device. Arlen placed the prism on the floor and keyed the radio. "Sentinel lead, Echo 7. The module is secured. You are clear to deactivate beacon protocols." There was a long silence. Then, "Copy that, Echo 7. Escorting you to Montreal for emergency landing. Ground teams will take over." The relief in the captain's face was unmistakable. As the aircraft stabilized and descended toward safety, Arlen stood quietly at the cockpit door. Rhea stepped beside him. "You saved everyone." Arlen shook his head softly. "I just cleaned up something I should have dealt with a long time ago." "Will they take you back?" she asked. "Maybe for questioning," Arlen said. "Maybe for closure. But I'm not the same man I was when I walked away." Rhea smiled gently. "Maybe that's why you survived." Arlen nodded once. Not in pride, but in acceptance. The horizon glowed ahead as the aircraft dipped toward Montreal. The sky was finally quiet. And if you've been listening this far, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what time it is where you're watching from. It helps more than you know.